How's that? No. Now, what is the second major division in the Gospel of John, entitled according to our outline? Manifested Signs of the Son. In public. It's public ministry, chapters 2 through 12. And for two classes we have traced through some of the changes and developments. What is the major outline that we're using for this section? Christ's signs in chapters 2 through 4. Given in a period of general reception. So we've traced it topically in terms of the reception that Christ received. And in chapters 2, 3, and 4, we have already seen that Jesus is dealing with people, and this appears to be the year of obscurity, the year when he was still popular, or the first 2 years of his life when he was in public ministry, when he was gaining popularity. And then chapters 5 through 12 is given quite a bit more emphasis by John, although it probably covers about the same period of time. John adds more weight to it because it stresses what? He's showing the growing opposition to Christ, the divided reaction, the confusion, the differences of opinion and all of that, the debate that ensued from what Christ did and said. So we're going to use this as our skeleton outline. Now I think I asked you to try to tell me what were the signs in John chapter 2. Anybody read it? Think over it. What's that? Yes, it helps if you're in the right book. Okay, the first sign is obviously a miracle. It certainly falls into the category of a blatant sign, something that he does that signifies something. What do you think this signifies? Okay, does anybody know what Tenney calls it? Have you been reading in his book? He says that each one of the miracles shows Christ's power over something. I just forget what it is. I just thought maybe somebody would remember it. I don't know whether it's no, that
was flowing. Is it
I don't remember. Right. Okay, I'm not sure what it is, but it certainly does show his power. In fact, all of the signs here show his power in one respect or another. It's very difficult to outline this section in terms of John's train of thought, because he seems to hit different things at different times. What kind of structure does the Gospel of John have? Did we ever talk about this? The structure of the Gospel of John? Well, you can get an illusion or an idea if you think about what are some of the key words to the Gospel of John. What's one key word to the Gospel of John? Belief and its synonyms and antonyms. Unbelief. Certainly. Pardon? Yes, to know. Another one. Another key word. What do you get if you believe? Well, yes, but the word isn't used that much. You have life. So life is one of John's buzzwords. Another one? Light is something that comes up a dozen times in the book of John. Light, life, and life, well, eternal life. Darkness versus light. You have certain contrasts, and it seems as if it just repeatedly comes up. Merrill Tenney, in I believe it was Tenney, in an article in Bibliothèque Sacra, which is an ongoing publication out of Dallas, once wrote an article on the symphonic structure in the book of John. He calls it symphonic. It's like a symphony, right? You have a string section over here, you have a brass section over here, you have a percussion section over here, woodwinds over there, and so in a symphony, sometimes this area will be dominant, but at all times several times you might see them or hear them working together. So different areas are emphasized throughout, but sometimes more dominant than at other times. That's symphonic structure, where you have several types of input interweaving harmoniously with the whole, like a symphony. It sounds nice because you have a whole bunch of input at the same time, working in harmony with one another, but at certain times, different aspects of the band or symphony are more dominant than others. So in one place, the light, Christ as the light, will be more stressed by John than, whereas another place, his life, eternal life, is stressed more than in other times. And yet it will come up 3 or 4 times. Where's the first reference, for example, to light in the Gospel of John? Sure, the first word in him, he shined in the darkness, and the darkness overcame it not. Right? And then John the Baptist introduces him as the light of the world. Right? And then John the Beloved says he's the light that shined in every man's heart. Right? But where does John refer to Jesus as the light of the world anymore in the Gospel of John? What's another reference? Light. Chapter 3. This is the condemnation, that light is come into the world. Men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone that doeth evil hates the light, neither cometh to the light. He kind of just throws it in there as a commentary. Where does it come up next? When he heals the blind man. Chapter 9. Light comes out again. Maybe he says it more in chapter 8, verse 12. Jesus again said unto the people, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of light. In chapter 9. As long as I am in the world, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And so he proved it by giving light to this blind man. The end of chapter 9, I am come into this world that they who see not might see. Talking about illuminating. I think it comes up in chapter 11 as well. Jesus said, if any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. And so he proceeded to bring light to Lazarus' darkened eyes. Right? Chapter 12. Verse 35, yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knows not where he goes. While you have light, believe in the light. And on and on. Okay? This is an illustration of the kind of structure that John uses. And it's one of the explanations for why you have such a difficult time outlining the contents of the book of John. We don't have a difficulty outlining the chronology of events in the book of John, but it's very difficult to outline the contents, the spiritual message of the Gospel of John. If I was to ask you to try to tell me what the specific difference is between the signs that are found in the and recorded in chapters 2 through 12 in this Gospel, you would probably have a great deal of difficulty. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 different outlines in front of me that my dad outlines the section one way, brings out certain points of emphasis, and somebody else does it another way. It's not as if they're wrong, but it's very little unanimity among even scholars as to exactly what John is telling us here. Like, what is the spiritual significance of the signs? We all know that he did this miracle in Cana, and then he went to Jerusalem and he said this, or he did this, and then he had a visit with Nicodemus. There's nothing difficult about telling the story, right? And that's basically how we've outlined chapters 2 through 12. We haven't done it theologically, we've done it chronologically, right? A period of general reception followed by a period of divided reaction. Well, that's important to see that. It's true. It makes sense, but it's still historically related, not content related. You understand? That doesn't really tell us anything about the message of Jesus in those 2 periods of time. For example, my dad stresses that chapters 2 through 4 shows Christ as a God of grace with a new product. And 443 to 547, he calls this Christ shown as a God of omnipotence with new power. The next division shows Christ as a God of satisfaction with a new provision. 8 through 10 shows Christ as a God of illumination with a new path. And in 11 through 12 it shows him as a God of glorification with a new prospect. Well, yeah, I listened to him teach that when I was in school in exegesis of John, and you can see it. Right? But it's not the only thing you can see. I mean, somebody else could outline it completely different. Emphasizing different things. I've struggled with this, and it's not an easy thing. I think the first sign, if you want my opinion, chapter 2 is showing us 2 sides of God's grace, if you wish. Just turn with me back to chapter 1, John chapter 1, verse 14. Everybody, please, quick, now. John 1:14. I'm sorry, it doesn't show us 2 aspects of his grace, but rather it shows us 2 aspects of his glory. What are the 2 aspects of Christ's glory that John? What are the 2 words to describe Christ's glory that John uses in John 1:14? Yes, he says that Christ's glory, the glory that he got from the Father, was full of 2 things. It was full of grace and full of truth. Remember my definition of grace that I've used over and over in synthesis and theology? What is grace? Yes, grace inherently is tied to the demonstration of power in one way or another. If you're going to be gracious to a person, how do you manifest graciousness? Yeah. I was very gracious of you. That is, to do whatever you did. So when you do something kind to another person, you're manifesting, you're putting something in action. So anytime you have Christ doing something, I want you to get this point. I think it's important. Okay, I'm going to say it once. That sounds like a tardy child frustrating her mother. There's one thing that I want to say is this. Based on John 1:14, whenever Jesus does something, a miracle, an overt miracle, that's a gracious manifestation of His glory. A gracious manifestation of His glory. Whenever He says something, that's another manifestation of His glory. But it stresses the truthfulness of His glory. If His glory is full of grace and truth, then what He does manifests grace, what He says manifests truth. Now, John 1:14 is the basis for coming to a conclusion like that. And so, when I come to John chapter 2, what is the first event? Into which of these two categories does it fall? Is it a deed primarily, or is it a message primarily? I'm sorry? It's a deed. He's actually doing a miracle, all right? And so what aspect of His glory is coming across here? Is it more truth or is it more grace? Yeah. So you could say that from one perspective that the sign of John chapter 2 verses 1 to 12 is glorious grace. He's demonstrating glorious grace, like manifold grace, special grace. That's the sign. If you don't like that, well, that's fine. That's the way I looked at it. That's the way I see it. And He's showing it specifically to intimates and family. Did you notice anything when we were going through chapters 2 through 4? Let me ask you. Who believed as a result of the miracle in Cana? The disciples. Who is it specifically that believed as a result, years later, of what they heard Jesus say down in Jerusalem in the next event in John chapter 2? Who eventually believed, being reminded later, years down the road, of what Jesus said at Jerusalem in the second part of this chapter, in the second event? It was the disciples again. It actually says that in verse 22. When therefore He was risen from the dead, His disciples remembered that He had said this to them, and they believed. What?
Nothing.
Yeah, you said something. You were not talking to me?
No. I was asking if he's pretty cold.
Oh.
I'm freezing.
Well, shut it. He's cold. Look at him.
My sweater on is cool now. My sweater's cool.
I hate first period classes, second period classes. It's so hard to get things. Everybody's tired. They know I'm not interested. Yeah, it was the disciples that believed as a result of what Jesus did and said in these two separate instances. Who believed as a result of what Jesus said in chapter 3?
Yeah.
Eventually, Nicodemus. Who believed as a result of what Jesus said in chapter 4?
Sure.
A woman. So, you notice a progression here. Chapter 2 is His most intimate followers end up believing as a result of what He does and says. In chapters 3 and 4, it's not His most intimate followers, it's complete strangers. But it's individuals who believe. But I don't think that's accidental. I think that John has purposely selected two very different events in chapter 2. It stuck them together from the first part of Jesus' ministry. One is a miracle and one is a message. One is a deed, and one is a work, and one is a word in chapter 2. Two completely different things, but they have the same result, same scope, right? They have the scope of his intimate followers. Say a positive effect, right? The most intimate followers believe on him. Whereas in chapters 3 and 4, you have you don't really have overt miracles. You have discussions, right? Although in the course of the discussions, you do have miracles coming through. You have the manifestation of power, special ability. So it's when he was talking with Nicodemus, he obviously flabbergasted Nicodemus with the kinds of things he was saying and claiming. When he was talking with the woman at the well, didn't he demonstrate a miracle to her? He certainly did. It wasn't an overt kind of miracle. He was healing somebody or something, but he was revealing something to her that showed his omnipotence, right? His omniscience. A very special person. It convinced her that he was a special person. And as a result of that, these two individuals believed. One was a high-class Jew and the other was a low-class Samaritan. Right? You couldn't get a greater contrast, but they were individuals that believed as a result. So, I think that's kind of interesting. I didn't do it this way, but you could subdivide chapters 2 to 4 that way. You could have Jesus manifesting signs to his most intimate followers in chapter 2, and in chapters 3 and 4 you have Jesus manifesting himself to unbelieving individuals, two individuals. The first two signs, both in chapter 2, occurred in different circumstances. The scope and result of each are identical. That is, belief is limited to his disciples. So I think that's what these two widely different events record for us. I think that on the basis of John 1:14, the first miracle of turning water into wine is showing us the glory of Christ, but since it's a deed, it's showing glory as grace. The second event, at the Passover, Jesus was down in Jerusalem and he cleaned out the temple and he had this significant discussion prophesying his death, burial, and resurrection. And as a result of what he said, his disciples believed. So that was manifesting his glory, but not gracious, not in terms of grace, but in terms of truth, what he spoke. Glorious grace, glorious truth. That's the way we're going to view it. We don't have time to really get into it this morning. Maybe I can give you a quick outline for the section, and then when we get together next class, then we'll peruse it further. Okay? Let me give you an outline of the first miracle. In verses 1 to 3, we have the setting for the sign. That's 1 to 3a, the setting for the sign. We are introduced to the time, the place, the people, and the event. The time, the place, the people, and the event. Next, we are introduced in verses 3b to 5 to the preceding conversations to the sign. Preceding conversations to the sign. And this breaks down into two parts. Mary's conversation with Jesus, 3b and 4. And in verse 5, Mary's conversation with the servants. Then in verses 6 to 8 we have the climactic conversation and sign. The climactic conversation and sign. Six to 8. And in verses 9 to 10 we have the resulting conversation after the sign. And in verses 11 and 12 we have the commentary, the author's commentary on the sign. Now, read those headings over and see if you can see a logical progression. The resulting conversation after the sign, verses 9 and 10. What keys do you think I used in analyzing these 12 verses? What keys do you think I used to summarize it? Okay, it's the logical summary of progression of events. Okay. Also, what?
68, what did you call it?
The climactic conversation and sign. Right, so the setting, preceding conversations, climactic conversation, resulting conversation, author's commentary. That is how this breaks down. That's one way you could do it. Logically. Stressing the sign in each case. Right? Setting for the sign. And I'll give you an outline for the end of the chapter as well, in verses 13 to 22. The sign of chapter 2, verses 13 to 22 is glorious truth to intimates. The first sign in chapter 2 was glorious grace. This one's glorious truth. Now this breaks down. Verse 13a is the occasion for the sign. (13a). First part of verse 13, the occasion for the sign. 13b through 15. Jesus' conduct which provoked the sign. Conduct which provoked the sign. (13b through 15). Are you ready? Verses 16 and 17. Jesus commands. Which provoked the sign. Verses 18 to 21. Jesus' conversation, which included the sign. And verse 22, the outcome of the sign. Okay, next class we'll go through chapter 2 and get it over with.
last one, the influence, and you get 22 to 23.